In the studio today, we're going to be reviewing the Legion 7 range of laptops. And I say laptops because we finally got in the Intel and the new Ryzen version of the Pro 7 and 7i range of laptops. So not only will we be reviewing these laptops, but we'll be finally able to put the Intel head-to-head with the Ryzen to help you decide which is the better gaming laptops for your needs. To try and make this comparison as fair as possible, I put an RTX 4080 in both these laptops, though they can come with a 4070 all the way up to a 4090. Now the Intel has got the i9-13900HX CPU, whereas the Ryzen has got the Ryzen 9 7945HX CPU. And this is our first time testing this 16-core 32-thread CPU, so I'm looking forward to see how it performs. Now both these laptops come with 2 sticks of DDR5 RAM. The Intel version comes with a spec of 5600, whereas the Ryzen comes with 5200. Now it's a bit of a shame, I don't understand why they've capped the Ryzen version, but realistically, that's not going to make much of a difference in day-to-day performance. These have both also got decent Gen 4 SSDs, and they've both got the 16-inch 2560 by 1600 500 nit 240Hz panel, which we've absolutely loved on these Legion 7 range of laptops. Now the Legion 7 and the 7i are identical apart from the fact they've got a Ryzen and an Intel CPU. So I'm going to just put the Ryzen aside, and we're going to look around the Intel version, because other than the processor, there's no difference. Now, if you're used to the 2022 version of this Legion 7, you're going to be a bit disappointed this year because Lenovo have made this laptop more affordable, if you can call £2,000 plus affordable, but they've stripped out a lot of features to do so. Now, fortunately, Lenovo have put in all decent components and screens and keyboards with these laptops, as they have with all the other Legions, and that's something you're going to get a solid experience with these Legion 7s. But this year, we now have a much more plasticky chassis, which is much more like a Legion 5 than what we used to have with the Legion 7. Now, when I first saw the Legion 7, I couldn't quite understand it. Why have they brought out like a plastic chassis, which is a real downgrade from 2022? And then obviously they announced the Legion 9, which we recently reviewed, which is the more premium version of this now Legion line, and is obviously a lot more expensive. Now, we'll link the Legion 9 review and also the Legion 9 versus the Legion 7, just in case you want to see the difference between that laptop and the more expensive Legion 9. But we do still get the lovely RGB keyboard with the number pad, and it is customizable in the actual Vantage software. We do also get a light strip across the front, but now is it gone from around the back like it was on the 2022 model. And unfortunately, we have lost the lit logos above the ports, and that's something that I used to really love on these Legion 7s, because even in a low light environment, you can easily see where you're plugging in your actual USBs and HDMIs. But still, they have got the actual symbol above, and you soon get to know where your ports are. It's not great, but at least it's a cheaper laptop this year to make up for it. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of plastic this year. The lid is still brushed aluminium, but there's a reasonable amount of flex, but then it's plastic on the palm rest, as I mentioned, and right around the back of the machine. This is all plastic. Now the base plate, that's metal, but despite there being a lot more plastic in the build this year, still feels reasonably premium, and it still feels pretty solid. And I don't think, if you're throwing this in and out of a laptop bag, you have no problems with the durability on this laptop. So the fact they've actually put in decent core components into this laptop and brought the price down this year, I think I can forgive them using more plastics and a slightly lesser build quality and less premium features in this model. Now with regards to the trackpad, again, this is another area where they've saved a little bit of money. We've got a plastic trackpad. It feels okay and it works fine. Certainly not as premium as the Legion 9 sort of glass trackpad or an Alienware trackpad or a razor blade trackpad, but it does do the job. And let's be honest, on a gaming laptop, most of the time you probably will be plugging in a mouse anyway. Now, with regards to the speakers, they're downward firing and sound like this. Speaker test of the Legion 7 at 50% volume. Now 80%. Not too bad for speakers, but I've certainly heard better and I would like more bass. And then above the keyboard, we've got a power button with a little light in the center. Now this light corresponds to your actual profile you're running in. Blue is your quiet mode, the white is your balanced, and then red for your performance. Now there's quite a big difference between those three power modes, and we will look at that in the performance section. Moving up to the screen, as I mentioned, it's a 16-inch panel, and it's a 16 by 10 with a resolution of 2560 by 1600. 500 nits of brightness, which is fantastic, especially for me. I'm often in quite bright environments. I love the 500 nit panel on this. And also it comes with a 240 Hz refresh rate, which is just fantastic and feels really fluid for your gaming needs. And then as we move to the top, we've got the webcam, which looks and sounds like this. And this is the webcam of the Legion 7 2023 gaming laptop. And then above the webcam, you notice this tiny little extruded part, which really does help open and close this laptop. Easily done with one finger, because you can get your finger right underneath there and lift it up. And you can pull it right back to almost 180 degrees, which is one of the things I've always loved with a lot of the Lenovo range of laptops. And being a reasonably large 6-inch laptop, we get a good array of ports. On the left side, we get a Thunderbolt 4 port and a USB-A. Obviously on the Ryzen version, it will be USB 4 instead of a Thunderbolt 4. On the right side, we get another USB-A. We get a webcam kill switch, and we also get a headset jack. And then on the rear of the laptop, we get the power jack, 2 more USB-A, an HDMI 2.1, another USB 4 / Thunderbolt 4 on the Intel, and an RJ45 port. So an excellent array of ports on this laptop. And the thing I love about these Legion range of laptops with the port layout is that a lot of the ports where you're infrequently using are plugged in at the back. So your power jack, your RJ45, your HDMI can be plugged at the back of your laptop, keeping it tidy, whereas you've got USB-A's and USB-C's at the side for your peripherals that you're plugging in and out and you need easy access to. So I do really like that. Then taking this laptop apart to get inside is relatively easy. There's just 10 Phillips screws around the base plate. Then once you remove those 10 Phillips, I usually use a suction cup, pop it onto one of the corners and slightly lift it away until I get my fingers underneath and prise it out. They're always quite tight pulling these off, but once you've done it and got the hang of it a couple of times and you realise that nothing's going to break, it's quite straightforward. Once we're inside the laptop, you can see we've got a nice big battery running right the way across the front of the machine, and we'll do the battery testing after the performance review. We've got 2 DDR5 RAM slots, which are easily user accessible. We've also got 2 M.2 8mm slots, which are nicely hidden under the included heat plate. So if you add another SSD later, you don't have to worry about getting an extra heatsink. And under one of the plates, we also have a removable M.2 Wi-Fi card, so you can change your Wi-Fi later if you wish. Lastly, you'll notice we've got a decent vapor chamber on both of these machines and 2 reasonably large fans, which blows the hot air out of the back and the side of the laptop to be able to pump all the hot air out of these hot running components. So onto the performance, and we're going to start by looking at the CPUs. Now the Intel i9 13900HX CPU has 8 performance cores and 16 efficiency cores, whereas the Ryzen 9 7945HX CPU has just 16 cores, which means both these CPUs has a total of 32 threads. But which is better, Intel's mix of performance cores and efficiency cores, or just the pure performance of the Ryzen 16-core CPUs? Starting with Geekbench 5, which is a very quick benchmark, the Ryzen 9 gets a really healthy single-core performance score, and even beats this year's Intel, which is really unusual, especially in the laptop space. And single-core performance leads to a snappy, responsive laptop with apps that are quick to open, so it is still very important. But moving on to the multi-core score in Geekbench 5, which is again a short test, the Intel with its 175 watt boost does take the lead here. But then when we move over to the Cinebench R23 multi-core score, which is a 10-minute long torture test, because it can only keep that 175 watt boost on the Intel CPU for about 2 minutes and then drop back to 125 watts, the Ryzen 9 with its much more efficient processor absolutely romps ahead in this benchmark and manages to run full throttle throughout the entire 10-minute test at only 115 watts, proving just how efficient the Ryzen chip is. And we ended up with an 18% lead for that Ryzen chip, which is quite a big deal. And there's one last thing to mention with regards to the CPUs, and that is that the Intel CPU can be undervolted and overclocked with either the Vantage software that comes installed on the laptop, or you can download Intel XG or ThrottleStop to manipulate that processor. Now, unfortunately, there's no such luck with the Ryzen CPU. There's nothing in Vantage, and I haven't found any tools to make any changes on that CPU yet. Now, moving over to the GPUs, both of these laptops have the NVIDIA RTX 4080. They've both got a 175 watt power budget and they both have G-Sync enabled screens, which is really nice to see. But the Intel version gets the added benefit of advanced Optimus, meaning you can change from dedicated to Optimus on the fly. Whereas the Ryzen version, you need to toggle the actual hardware mux, which is in the Vantage software and does require a reboot. Then running a quick times by benchmark on both of these laptops, Intel takes a nice lead here. The Intel Legion is able to access more of that 175 watts than the Ryzen version. And on further investigation, it turns out that the Ryzen laptop constantly runs the CPU at over 5 GHz throughout all of the benchmarks, leading to obviously more wattage needed for that CPU and therefore less wattage allocated to the Nvidia GPU. And this also translates over into the real world games. We ran Shadow the Tomb Raider on both laptops side by side and monitored the temperatures and the actual wattage on both the actual CPUs and GPUs. And again, in these tests, the Ryzen version kept over 5.2 GHz throughout the entire run at 88 watts, whereas the Intel dropped back down to about 3.3 GHz at only 57 watts. This allowed the RTX 4080 an extra 10 to 20 watts on that Intel version of the laptop, which then leads to higher clock speeds. So what this will basically mean, most games are GPU bound, and in that case, the Intel version of this laptop will get better frame rates. But if you are running a very heavily CPU bound game, then the Ryzen version could take the lead. But as most games are GPU bound, the Intel version does do slightly better at gaming. And then when we look at internal temperatures, it comes as no surprise that the Ryzen version does run hot with just how fast we're running this CPU. And it can very often get up to 100 degrees centigrade when we're actually gaming. Whereas the Intel, which drops back on its clocks, sits at a much more comfortable approximate 75 degrees C. But when we look at the GPUs on both of the Ryzen and the Intel versions of the laptops, both those run mid-70s again, which is perfectly fine for gaming laptops. And external temperatures on both these laptops is a complete non-issue. They both run incredibly cool when gaming on both the keyboards and the palm rest, leading to some really comfortable long-term gaming sessions. And with regards to noise, they both top out at 55 decibels in their performance mode, which although is quite loud, is quite normal for a gaming laptop. And if you're not happy with it running that loud, you also have a balanced and a quiet mode, which run at 50 and 45 decibels respectively. But as you change it down to balanced and quiet, you will also lose some performance. But I do find most games still run great in the balanced mode. Moving over to the battery, and this really surprised me this year. Now normally, with regards to the battery life on these laptops, the Ryzen always comes out ahead of Intel. When we did our usual battery test, streaming YouTube over Wi-Fi at 200 nits of brightness, the Ryzen version came in at a mere 3 hours and 54 minutes, which is really quite poor, one of the worst results we've had on a gaming laptop this year. Now the Intel didn't fare that much better, but did come in at 4 hours and 33 minutes, which although is not amazing, is certainly quite a big difference over the Ryzen version. So with pretty average battery life on both of these gaming laptops, fortunately Lenovo have included a compact 330 watt GAN charger with both the Intel and the Ryzen version this year. And this is certainly a lot better than the old-fashioned 300 watt that they used to use, which was absolutely massive. This 330 is quite compact, and if it's still too big to be carrying around for you, you can get by with USB-C power adapters up to 140 watt on these laptops. Now I tested them both through my monitor, which has got 100 watt PD, and they both performed really well for my day-to-day work tasks at that 100 watt. But the way that Lenovo issues that 100 watts to the laptops, it gives the majority of that power to the CPU, meaning it's great for work, but not so great gaming over that 100 watt PD. Okay, then on to the conclusion. I have to say, this year is very close between these two laptops. Now usually the Intel always came out on top with regards to features and CPU performance, but that's not the case this year. The Ryzen was always cheaper. Now Ryzen is still cheaper, but we're actually getting better CPU performance than the Intel version, and that is a real turn up for the books. We also get USB-C 4 now for that high-speed bandwidth, which is something we were always lacking on the Ryzen side, meaning it's much more difficult to choose one over the other. Now, I would say for most people, you need to vote with your wallets, and if you find out that the Ryzen version has a much better price than the Intel version, I definitely recommend picking it up. Now the Intel version did have slightly better gaming performance, but that's only because it scales that CPU back to about 3.3 GHz whilst it's gaming, whereas the Ryzen chip was over 5.2 GHz that entire time. So any CPU bound games are going to do better on that Ryzen laptop. Well, that's my thoughts on the Legion 7 versus Legion 7i. As always, I'd love to know what you guys think. Which one of these two would you pick? Or do you think you should go for a different laptop altogether? Put your comments down below and I will get back to you. And as always, thanks for watching.